David lived in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of a small county town. His house was modest, painted in soft cream color with a little garden out front. But the one thing that stood out the most on his property was a tall, old tree that had been there long before David bought the house. Its wide branches spread out gracefully, offering shade during hot summer days and filling the air with the sweet smell of blossoms in spring. For David, the tree was more than just a piece of nature. It was a memory of peace, of family gatherings under its shade, and of calm evenings where he sat with a book listening to the leaves dance in the wind. The tree, however, was not loved by everyone. The Homeowners Association, known in short as the HOA, had its own opinions about what the neighborhood should look like. They believed that every yard should be neat, uniform, and carefully trimmed. The big tree, with its wide roots and tall height, did not fit perfectly into their idea of order. Some board members even complained that it blocked the street view and caused leaves to scatter onto the road. At first, David ignored the letters the HOA sent him. He thought they were just minor warnings that would fade away. After all, the tree had been there for decades. He had seen children climb it, families take shade under it, and even birds build nests along its branches. He believed no one could have the right to demand its removal. But the HOA grew louder. A few neighbors joined the complaints, saying the tree was messy or that its branches stretched too far. One day, during a community meeting, the head of the HOA, a stern man named Mr. Brown, pointed directly at David and said, "Your tree is a problem. You must either cut it down or have it trimmed properly, or else we will act." David felt his face heat with frustration. He stood up, trying to remain calm, and said, "This tree is part of my home. It does no harm to anyone. It gives shade and life to this place." The room went silent, but Mr. Brown shook his head. Rules are rules. If one yard stands out too much, it ruins the look of the whole neighborhood. You were warned. For weeks, the argument grew heavier. Letters came almost daily, threatening fines and legal action. David tried to compromise, offering to trim a few branches on his own, but the HOA rejected his efforts. To them, the tree was either fully trimmed into their approved shape or removed completely. One morning, while David was at work, a loud grinding sound filled the neighborhood. Neighbors peeked out of their windows as workers sent by the HOA arrived with saws and trucks. They surrounded the tree, and without hesitation, began cutting it. By the time David rushed home, half of his beloved tree was gone. Its once perfect shape had been slashed unevenly, leaving it awkward and almost comical. One side of the tree remained tall and leafy, while the other side was bare and flat as if someone had sliced it with a giant knife. David stood frozen on his front lawn, staring at what had been done. His heart ached. "They had no right," he whispered, his voice shaking. The workers, already packing up, avoided his eyes. Mr. Brown, who stood nearby with his arms folded, said only one thing, "Now it matches the rules." Then he walked away. For days after, David felt nothing but anger and sadness. He avoided looking out the window. Neighbors murmured about the strange sight, some laughing quietly at how ridiculous the tree looked, while others shook their heads in sympathy. Children pointed at it as they rode past on bicycles. The once proud, towering tree was now a strange, lopsided figure. But as time went on, something unexpected began to happen. People outside the neighborhood started noticing. A jogger took a picture of the tree one morning and posted it online, calling it the most awkward tree I've ever seen. The photo spread quickly, drawing curious visitors. Cars slowed down on the street to take a look. Some even stopped to pose in front of the tree, laughing and snapping photos. At first, David was confused. Why would anyone find joy in what the HOA had done to his tree? But then he noticed how the visitors weren't mocking him personally. They were simply fascinated by the tree's strange, unique shape. Couples posed under the half shadow it cast, teenagers filmed short videos with it in the background, and families gathered to take funny group pictures. The more people came, the more David realized something. The Hoa might have tried to take away the beauty of his tree, but instead, they had turned it into something even bigger. His home, once quiet and ordinary, had become a local landmark. And though he still mourned the loss of the full tree, a spark of pride began to grow in him again. What had started as a bitter dispute was slowly turning into something unexpected, something that neither David nor the Hoa could have imagined. The half-cut tree was about to change the whole neighborhood in ways no one had predicted. In the days after the tree was cut, David's home became busier than ever before. What had once been a quiet street where only neighbors passed now turned into a spot for strangers. At first, a few people came by to snap photos, but soon the numbers grew. Cars parked along the curb, groups walked up with cameras in hand, and even local college students came with tripods and laughter. The tree, awkwardly sliced in half, looked so unusual that it became impossible to ignore. On one side it still had strong branches stretching wide, full of leaves. On the other side, it was empty, flat, and bare. To some it looked like a giant green haircut gone wrong. To others, it looked like modern art standing in the middle of a suburban street. People gave it nicknames such as Half-Shade and the Split Giant. David stood on his porch most evenings watching people interact with the tree. Children giggled as they stood in the shadow of its leafy half, pretending the other side was invisible. Couples posed with silly faces, and some even used the tree for romantic photos, calling it the tree of balance. He overheard one teenager saying, "This is the weirdest but coolest thing I've ever seen in this town." Though David still carried hurt from what the Hoa had done, he began to smile again as he watched strangers enjoy the tree. His sadness slowly turned into curiosity. Why were people so drawn to it? Perhaps, he thought, people were tired of everything looking perfect. The tree was different, imperfect, and yet it stood proudly. But the Hoa was not pleased. Members of the board gathered one evening near the tree, whispering in frustration as more visitors arrived. Mr. Brown, the head of the Hoa, frowned deeply as he saw a group of tourists laughing and taking pictures. "This is not what we wanted," he muttered. "We cut it to match the rules, not to turn this place into a circus." Another board member, Mrs. Lee, shook her head. "It's bringing too much attention. Cars are blocking driveways. People are walking across lawns. This is not order, this is chaos." They sent David another letter, demanding that he stop encouraging the crowds. David laughed bitterly when he read it. He had done nothing to encourage anyone. The people came on their own. He thought about ignoring the letter, but instead he placed it on his fridge like a reminder. He would not let them control everything. As days passed, local news caught the story. A reporter visited David's home and asked for an interview. At first, David was shy. He didn't like being on camera, but the reporter insisted the county wanted to know about the famous tree. Standing in front of the half-cut trunk, David said softly, "This tree was here long before the Hoa. They tried to make it smaller, but instead they made it stand out. Maybe that says something about how life works. Sometimes when someone tries to break what you love, it can still grow into something meaningful." The interview spread quickly online. Within a week, the tree was being shared on social media pages across the state. People drove from different towns just to see it. Food trucks even began parking nearby, hoping to serve the visitors who came to take pictures. The once quiet street now had the hum of life and laughter each evening. For David, this brought mixed feelings. He was glad people found joy in the tree, but the crowd also made his home less peaceful. There were times he wanted to sit quietly on his porch, but instead he heard camera clicks and playful chatter. Still, he reminded himself of how hopeless he had felt when the tree was cut. Now at least the tree had a new purpose. The Hoa, however, grew angrier. They held another meeting to discuss the problem. Mr. Brown raised his voice, saying, This is a disgrace. Our neighborhood looks like a carnival. This must stop at once. But not everyone agreed with him. A few neighbors, who at first had supported cutting the tree, now saw an opportunity. One neighbor, Tom, said, "People are coming here every day. Maybe this is good for us. Small businesses are selling drinks. Kids are earning money offering parking spaces. Why fight something that's helping?" Arguments filled the room. Some wanted the tree removed completely. Others wanted to let it stay and enjoy the attention. The HOA had never been so divided. Meanwhile, David received letters from people thanking him for not removing the tree. A photography club invited him to speak about it. A small art gallery even offered to host an exhibit of photographs taken of the tree. What had started as a painful loss was turning into a movement that celebrated uniqueness. One evening, as the sun set behind the uneven branches, David sat under the tree with his neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Green. She had always admired the tree's blossoms in spring. She looked at him kindly and said, "Do you see what happened here? They tried to silence this tree, but instead it found a new voice. Sometimes the most beautiful things come from mistakes." David nodded quietly. For the first time since the tree was cut, he felt a sense of pride stronger than his sadness. The tree was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who came to see it, laugh with it, and find meaning in it. What none of them knew yet was that the story of the tree was only beginning. The more attention it received, the greater the tension would become. And soon, the fight between David and the HOA would reach far beyond their quiet street. The popularity of the half-cut tree did not slow down. In fact, it kept growing. Every weekend, cars lined the street and people gathered with cameras, snacks, and even picnic blankets. Children laughed as they played under the leafy half, while parents posed with the strange shadow it cast. The tree had turned into a community attraction, something that brought color and joy to the county. But inside the HOA office, joy was the last thing on their minds. Mr. Brown paced back and forth, his face red with frustration. "This was never supposed to happen," he muttered. "We wanted order, not this circus." Mrs. Lee, who usually agreed with him, looked tired. "The more we fight it, the more attention it gets. People are calling it a landmark now. It's on maps. There are even reviews online calling it the best photo spot in the county." Another board member, Mark, tapped his pen on the table and said, "We should find David again. Make his life so difficult that he finally agrees to take the tree down completely." Mr. Brown nodded quickly. "Yes, more fines. If he cannot pay, we'll take legal action." And so, the next morning, David found a letter pinned to his door. The HOA claimed that the visitors were violating community rules about peace and safety. They demanded that David install fences to keep people away from the tree. They also fined him for disturbance of the neighborhood. David sighed heavily as he read the letter. He knew the HOA would not stop. But when he showed the letter to his neighbor Mrs. Green, she shook her head firmly. "They cannot scare you forever," she said. "You should fight back." David thought about it all night. At first, he felt hopeless. He was just one man, while the HOA was a whole organization with money and power. But then he remembered something. He was not alone anymore. The visitors, the neighbors who enjoyed the attention, the people online who loved the tree, they were all part of the story now. The very next day, David contacted a local lawyer. He explained the history of the tree, the cutting by the HOA, and the new fines. The lawyer, a calm man named Peter, listened carefully. After a long pause, Peter said, "You may have a case. If they damaged your tree without full permission, and now they are harassing you, you can fight this in court." David felt a spark of hope. For the first time since the cutting, he had someone standing beside him. News spread quickly that David was considering legal action. Reporters returned to his yard, asking questions and filming the tree again. Social media buzzed with updates. Supporters offered donations to help him with legal fees. Some even brought signs that said "Save the half-tree and let it grow." The HOA grew nervous. The board had never faced so much public pressure before. Mr. Brown tried to hold a meeting with the residents, but the room was packed with people defending David. Some shouted that the tree had made the neighborhood famous in a good way. Others pointed out that small businesses were earning money from the visitors. Mr. Brown banged his fist on the table. "This is not about money or fame," he shouted. "This is about rules. Without rules, there is no order." But his words no longer carried the same weight. Even members of the board looked uncertain. Mrs. Lee finally spoke up. "Maybe the rules need to change. The world is noticing our town because of this tree. Isn't that something worth thinking about?" David, who attended the meeting quietly, stood up and said in a steady voice, "You cut my tree without care. You left it broken, but people found beauty in it. You can try to find me, but you cannot erase what it has become. It belongs not just to me, but to everyone who sees meaning in it." The room fell silent. For a moment, even Mr. Brown had no reply. Later that night, David returned home to find another crowd near the tree. A group of musicians was playing guitars under its branches, filling the air with cheerful tunes. Children danced on the sidewalk, and families clapped along. David stood on his porch, watching the scene with a smile. This was more than he had ever imagined. The tree was alive in spirit, even if half its body had been taken. But he also knew the fight was not over. The HOA would not give up easily. If they could not control the visitors, they would try harder to break him. As the music played in the background, David looked up at the uneven branches and whispered, "We're not done yet." And deep inside, he understood that the battle was no longer about one tree. It was about freedom, about standing against unfair rules, and about proving that beauty could survive even in the face of force. The next chapter of the fight was coming soon, and it would decide not only the fate of the tree but also the spirit of the whole community. The decision was made. David would take the HOA to court. It was not an easy choice, but after weeks of threats, fines, and endless letters, he knew he could not let them win. The tree had become bigger than just a plant in his yard. It was now a symbol of standing up to unfair control. His lawyer, Peter, helped file the case. The claim was simple: the HOA had damaged his property without his consent when they cut the tree. They had also harassed him with fines and demands that went beyond reason. David's heart raced when he signed the papers. For years, he had lived quietly, avoiding conflict. Now, he was at the center of one. The news spread quickly. Reporters covered the story again, calling it the half-tree vs the HOA. People across the county followed updates closely. Some came to visit the tree just to see what the fight was about. Social media exploded with comments, memes, and jokes about the lopsided landmark. The more the HOA tried to push their message of order, the more people sided with David. Still, court was not easy. On the first day of the hearing, David sat nervously at the long wooden table while Mr. Brown and several HOA board members sat on the other side. Mr. Brown looked confident, his arms folded, a thin smile on his face. He believed rules were on his side. The judge entered, and the courtroom grew silent. Peter stood and spoke first. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of rights. My client, David, owned a healthy, mature tree that was cut without his permission. The HOA claimed authority, but in doing so they caused damage to his property. They cannot punish him further for something they themselves created." Then it was the HOA's turn. Their lawyer, a sharp-tongued man in a gray suit, argued, the HOA acted within its rights to maintain the uniform look of the neighborhood. The tree was too large, its branches extended beyond limits, and it caused disorder. Our client, the HOA, had every right to trim it to fit community standards. The judge listened carefully, asking questions about documents and letters. David's hands shook as he watched. But when it was his turn to speak, he stood slowly, took a breath, and faced the court. "This tree," he said, his voice soft at first but growing stronger, "was here long before I moved into the neighborhood. It gave shade, beauty, and life. The HOA came without warning and cut it in half. They left it broken. But even so, people found joy in it. Now they want to fine me for what they did. I ask only for fairness, and for the right to keep what is left of my tree." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned forward, listening carefully. Outside the court, supporters gathered with signs that read "Stand with David" and "Save the Half-Tree." They cheered as he walked out, though David felt tired from the weight of the day. He thanked them quietly and returned home, where once again visitors filled the street, laughing and taking pictures. The case stretched on for weeks. Each hearing brought more attention. Local newspapers printed drawings of the half-tree on their front pages. A bakery even started selling cookies shaped like half-circles, calling them half-tree bites. What the HOA had meant as punishment had turned into something the entire county celebrated. Inside the HOA meetings, tension boiled. Mrs. Lee tried to calm things down, suggesting they find a compromise, but Mr. Brown refused. "If we lose this case, our rules will mean nothing," he snapped. "We must win, no matter what." But cracks began to show. Some board members admitted quietly to neighbors that maybe the HOA had gone too far. The fight was draining them, and the bad publicity was growing worse by the day. Meanwhile, David found unexpected strength. Strangers sent him letters of support, small businesses donated to his legal fund, and even school art projects featured drawings of the famous tree. Children who visited sometimes rang his bell just to say thank you. For the first time in his life, David felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. One evening, as he stood under the uneven branches, a young girl asked if she could take a photo with him next to the tree. He smiled and agreed. Later, her parents told him she had been sick for months, but visiting the tree had made her smile again. That night, David realized it was not just about fighting the HOA anymore. It was about protecting something that brought hope and laughter to people. The final hearing was scheduled. Both sides prepared their strongest arguments. David lay awake the night before, listening to the wind move through the half branches. He whispered, "We've come this far. We can't lose now." The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Neighbors who once stayed quiet now came to support him. The judge looked serious as the last arguments were presented. The HOA's lawyer repeated that rules were rules, but Peter calmly explained how those rules had been misused, how power had been abused, and how a single tree had become a symbol of resilience. When David gave his final words, he said, "They wanted to erase beauty, but beauty found its way back. This tree may be imperfect, but so are we all. And sometimes imperfection is what makes life meaningful." The judge leaned back, thoughtful. He did not give his decision right away, but everyone knew the case had grown larger than expected. It was no longer just about a tree. It was about fairness, community, and the right to be different. As David walked out of the court, cheers erupted again. The fight was not finished yet, but he felt something deep in his heart. No matter the outcome, he had already won something more important than rules or fines. He had shown that one voice could stand up against many, and that even a broken tree could inspire a whole county. The day of the decision arrived at last. The courtroom was filled to the very back, with reporters, neighbors, and curious visitors who had traveled just to hear what would happen. Everyone sat quietly, the air heavy with tension. David sat beside his lawyer Peter, his palms sweaty. He tried to breathe slowly, but his heart raced. Across the room sat Mr. Brown and the other HOA board members, stiff and silent, their lawyer whispering something to them. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, entered the room. The crowd stood, then sat again as she began to speak. "I have listened to both sides," she said firmly. "This case is unusual. At its heart, it asks whether rules are more important than fairness, and whether order can exist without respect." Everyone leaned forward, waiting. The judge continued, "The HOA cut the tree without proper legal permission. In doing so, they damaged private property. Furthermore, the fines issued afterward are not justified. The court rules in favor of David. The HOA must cancel all fines and pay damages for the harm caused." The courtroom erupted with gasps and applause. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras flashed, and supporters cheered loudly. David felt his chest tighten as relief washed over him. After months of pressure, he had won. He looked at Peter, who nodded with a small smile. But the judge was not finished. She raised her hand for silence. At the same time, she said, "This case shows the need for balance. A neighborhood is shared by many, and peace must be protected. While the tree remains, the HOA may set fair conditions to handle crowds. This court advises cooperation moving forward." Her words were calm, but strong. Both sides were reminded that the battle was not only about winning, but also about learning to live together. When the hearing ended, David stepped outside to face the crowd. People cheered and clapped, some chanting, "Save the half-tree." He smiled shyly, overwhelmed by the attention. Cameras pointed at him, and reporters asked questions all at once. "How do you feel about the win?" one shouted. David hesitated, then said, "This is not only my win. This is for everyone who believed that beauty matters, even when it doesn't fit the rules. The tree will stay. And I hope it continues to bring joy." The crowd cheered again. But while David celebrated, Mr. Brown stormed out of the courtroom with anger in his eyes. He spoke to reporters with a bitter tone. "This is not the end. The HOA will not allow chaos in our community. We will find other ways to restore order." His words carried a warning, one that David did not ignore. Back in the neighborhood, the tree had become more popular than ever. The victory in court gave it new energy. More visitors came, more photos were taken, and local businesses near the area grew busier. Shops sold T-shirts with drawings of the half-tree. Cafes offered drinks called the Split Shade. A small festival was even planned, with music and food stands celebrating the county's strangest landmark. David watched it all with mixed emotions. He was happy that people found joy in the tree, but he also worried about what the HOA might do next. He knew Mr. Brown's anger would not fade easily. One evening, David sat with Mrs. Green under the tree as the sun went down. She patted his shoulder kindly. "You did well," she said. "You stood up for yourself and for all of us. This tree is no longer just yours. It belongs to the spirit of this town." David nodded, but his eyes were serious. "I'm glad, but I can feel the HOA is not done. They will look for another way." And he was right. The HOA soon began sending letters again, not about cutting the tree, but about the visitors. They complained about traffic, noise, and litter. They accused David of turning his property into a business, even though he earned no money from the visitors. This time, though, things were different. Many neighbors now supported him openly. Families who had once stayed quiet now stood by his side, signing petitions to allow the tree to remain without restrictions. Small businesses even offered to help clean the street and manage parking. What had begun as one man's fight was now a community effort. The HOA found itself facing not just David, but dozens of voices united together. Still, Mr. Brown refused to give up. In private meetings, he urged the board to tighten rules even further, to push back against the growing crowds. "If we don't act," he said coldly, "we lose control forever." But the more he fought, the more the town rallied around the tree. People began to see the HOA not as protectors of order, but as stubborn rulers unwilling to listen. David, meanwhile, felt a change within himself. He was no longer just a quiet man living in a modest house. He had become a symbol of standing up against unfairness. Strangers stopped him on the street to shake his hand. Children asked him to tell the story of the tree. Though he felt shy, he accepted that his life had taken a new path. One night, as he stood under the uneven branches, the moonlight shining through the leaves, David whispered, "You and I have been through so much. They tried to silence you, but instead you spoke louder. Whatever happens next, we will face it together." The tree stood tall, half bare and half full, a reminder that even when something is broken, it can still hold meaning. The battle with the HOA was not over. A bigger storm was on the way. But for now, David had won the first major victory. And the half-tree, once a wound in his heart, had become the strongest symbol of hope in the county. The weeks after the court victory were filled with celebration. The half-tree became more famous than ever. Families came from nearby towns, artists painted it, and musicians played under its uneven shade. A local tourism group even added it to a list of must-see county landmarks. David enjoyed the joy the tree brought, but he also felt the weight of being at the center of everything. Visitors sometimes knocked on his door to thank him, and children asked for photos with him. He smiled and agreed, though inside he still longed for peace. But peace was far from what the HOA wanted. Inside their meeting room, Mr. Brown slammed his hand on the table. "We lost in court, but this is not finished," he growled. "The neighborhood has turned into a spectacle. Cars block driveways. Crowds gather at all hours. This must end." Mrs. Lee spoke gently. "Maybe we should let it be. The town is happy, and even businesses are gaining from it. Fighting only makes us look worse." But Mr. Brown shook his head. "No. If we allow this, we lose our authority. Without authority, the rules mean nothing. We will create new regulations." The board drafted stricter rules overnight. They claimed no property could be used in a way that attracted uncontrolled gatherings. They demanded David build barriers around his yard to stop visitors from stepping near the tree. They also tried to fine him again for encouraging disturbance, even though he did nothing to invite the crowds. When David received the new letter, he felt anger rise in his chest. He read it twice, then placed it on his table. "They will never stop," he whispered. Peter, his lawyer, shook his head when he saw the letter. "They are twisting rules again. But this time, it's not just about you. The whole town sees what they are doing. You're not standing alone anymore." And Peter was right. When the HOA tried to enforce the new rules, neighbors pushed back. Families spoke at meetings, defending David. Small business owners argued that the visitors were helping the local economy. Even teachers said their students were inspired by the story of the tree. One evening, a group of young people held a candlelight gathering under the half-tree. They sang softly and placed small lanterns around the trunk. David watched from his porch, his eyes wet with emotion. He realized the tree had grown into something larger than anyone could have imagined. The HOA, however, grew more desperate. Mr. Brown called for patrols to monitor the street. He warned of safety risks and claimed the tree might fall because it was uneven. He even tried to bring in an inspector to declare it dangerous. When the inspector arrived, David stood with him as he examined the trunk and branches. After a long check, the inspector said calmly, "This tree is strong. It's healthy. There is no danger." David smiled, but Mr. Brown was furious. The tension reached its peak when the HOA announced an emergency meeting. Flyers were placed on doors, urging all residents to attend. The room was packed that night, filled with neighbors, reporters, and visitors who had heard about the fight. Mr. Brown stood at the front, his voice loud and firm. "This must stop. Our neighborhood is drowning in chaos. We must remove the tree completely, once and for all. Gasps filled the room. Some nodded, but many shook their heads. Mrs. Lee stood and raised her voice, something she rarely did. Enough, Mr. Brown. This tree has brought people together. It has given this town joy. We cannot destroy it again. Others began to speak too. One man said, "My business has grown because of the visitors. Why would we end something good?" A mother added, "My children love playing here. This tree makes them smile." Voices filled the room, louder and louder, until the meeting turned into a storm of arguments. Mr. Brown shouted, trying to regain control, but the tide had turned. The board members themselves looked divided. For the first time, Mr. Brown stood almost alone. That night, David walked home under the stars, his heart pounding. The fight was reaching its end. The HOA had made its final push, but the people were no longer on their side. The tree had become too beloved, too symbolic, to be destroyed again. Still, David knew Mr. Brown would not give up easily. He would try one last move, one last attempt to remove the tree. As he looked up at the uneven branches glowing in the moonlight, David whispered, "We've stood strong this far. We will hold on for whatever comes next." The half-tree stood tall in silence, a symbol of survival and unity. The next battle would decide everything: the future of the tree, the neighborhood, and the fight between control and freedom. The morning of the final showdown arrived with a crisp breeze that rustled the leaves of the half-tree. David stood on his porch, looking at the uneven branches glowing in the early sunlight. He felt nervous but also ready. Today, the HOA was bringing one last attempt to enforce their rules, and the entire neighborhood had gathered to see what would happen. Crowds had formed on the sidewalks, holding signs that read, "Save the half-tree and Beauty Matters." Reporters were present from local and even regional news stations. The half-tree had become more than a tree; it was a symbol of hope, resilience, and community spirit. Inside the HOA meeting room, Mr. Brown attempted to speak first. His voice was firm, though his confident posture was shaken by the overwhelming support David had gained. "This neighborhood is being ruined by disorder. The tree attracts too many visitors. We must remove it," he said. But the room was not empty of resistance. Mrs. Lee stepped forward, speaking clearly and firmly. "No. The tree brings joy, life, and unity to our neighborhood. Rules are meant to serve people, not destroy what is good. We cannot force destruction when the community values something so deeply." One by one, neighbors rose to speak. A teacher shared how her students had drawn pictures of the tree in class and wrote essays about its story. A small business owner explained how visitors brought much needed income to their shop. Children held up drawings they had made of the tree, each showing both the leafy and bare sides, symbolizing balance. Even some HOA members began to shift. They realized the tree had become something larger than rules or control. Mr. Brown's words grew weaker as the voices of the community filled the room. David stepped forward at last. His voice was calm but strong. "This tree was cut in half without my permission. The HOA thought they could erase it, but instead it became something extraordinary. It has taught us that even when something is damaged, it can still bring beauty, joy, and unity. This tree is not just mine. It belongs to everyone who sees meaning in it." The room was silent. Even Mr. Brown could not respond. After a long pause, the HOA board voted. The majority sided with the community, refusing to remove the tree. The decision was final. David had won completely. Outside, the crowd cheered loudly. Children ran under the branches, families posed for photos, and neighbors shook hands with David. It was a moment of victory not only for him but for the whole town. The half-tree had survived, stronger in spirit than ever. In the days that followed, life around the tree flourished. Local artists painted murals of it on walls nearby. Social media pages celebrated it as a landmark, and the story of the HOA dispute became a tale of courage and resilience shared throughout the county. David's quiet home had transformed into a center of community pride and creativity. Mr. Brown, though still bitter, realized that the fight was truly over. He no longer had the authority to remove the tree, and even many of his supporters had changed their minds. Slowly, he began to accept the reality that not everything could be controlled, and that sometimes beauty and joy must take precedence over strict rules. David spent evenings sitting under the half-tree, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about the court battles, the letters, the tension, and the moments of doubt. And yet, he felt grateful. The tree had taught him resilience, and it had brought the neighborhood together in a way no one had imagined. Children came by to sit in the shade and tell him stories. Visitors waved as they took pictures. People who had never spoken to him before now shared smiles and laughter. The tree had become more than wood and leaves, it had become a living symbol of unity and perseverance. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows through the branches, Mrs. Green approached David with a basket of flowers. She smiled warmly and said, "You did well. This tree will remind everyone that even when life is difficult or unfair, we can stand strong and find beauty." David looked up at the uneven branches, feeling a sense of peace he had not known in months. "You survived so much," he whispered to the tree. "And now you help everyone survive too." The half-tree remained exactly as it was, a perfect balance of leafy growth and bare space, strange and unique. People continued to visit, to laugh, to create memories. Its story became known throughout the county and even inspired a few nearby towns to celebrate their own unique landmarks. In the end, what had started as a painful act of destruction became a symbol of life, resilience, and community spirit. The tree had been cut in half, but it had grown stronger in purpose. David had been tested, the neighborhood had been challenged, and the HOA had learned a lesson in humility. And as the sun set behind the half-tree, casting its long shadow over the street, David knew that this was only the beginning. The half-tree would continue to stand as a reminder that even when life is unfair, hope, unity, and beauty can survive. It was no longer just a tree. It was a story, a landmark, and a symbol of strength for everyone who passed by.